Right, morning isolators. It's Monday morning. Just had a look on YouTube and on Facebook, and these seem to be going down rather well, don't they? That's because we're all bored, I know. But no, it's keeping me sane. It's actually a bit like fishing for me. It's something to think about all the time. I find myself laying in bed, thinking about what I'm going to film tomorrow. It's like planning another fishing session. I even found myself, I always read in bed. I've got a Kindle and I read to go to sleep. And last night I found myself reading An Obsession with Carp, the next chapter on Kindle, just to sort of plan what I was going to talk about today. And one thing I did realise that is a lot of the better stories, better memories, that I just assumed I'd written down because I've told them a few times to mates and that, you know, around campfires and what have you. A lot of them aren't actually in the book, and there's a common denominator there. A lot of the ones that aren't in the book are the ones that revolve around alcohol, basically, which are always the funniest stories. So I suppose when I wrote the book, I was maybe trying to paint a slightly better picture of myself. But I'm sure you know that's not true. Like I've said before, this was the 80s. Excuse me, so we drink. And I'm a little bit obsessed with time travel. Always have been. I've read so many books. I've read hundreds of books on time travel, from the sort of pseudo-technical ones, because there can't be an actual technical one because it doesn't exist, right down to the trashy novels. I've watched loads of films, even more recently podcasts, you know, from apparently very intelligent people talking about how light bends and how, you know, time isn't constant, and it's just a passion of mine. But I've always said, if I could invent a time machine, I wish I could, but if I could, I'd just go back to the 80s. I wouldn't change anything, you know. I wouldn't need all this information of what was going to happen to, you know, play the odds and the stock market and bet and that. I'd just go back to 1980 and I'd just do it again. I'd do it exactly the same, because for me that was the time of our lives, or mine. The 80s, the 90s, it was just such fun. I think the beauty of it was most people didn't care about too much back then. I think a lot of that might have been because it was pre-internet, so you had more of a sense of, how can I put it, sort of a freedom or independence, or people didn't know what you were doing unless you wanted them to know what you were doing. You didn't know what other people were doing unless they wanted you to know what they were doing. You could go off and you could have a whale of a time, and, you know, you could misbehave or behave, and you could fish, or you could go here, or you could party, or you could do whatever. And you were building your own memories for yourself and your close friends. So you didn't really feel the need to behave in a certain way because no one else would know. And I think that's what I liked about the 80s, was just that complete freedom. You could do what you liked, when you liked, where you liked, as long as you didn't upset anybody else. And that's pretty much how I lived my life. As I briefly alluded to last time, I was for a while a steel erector, and I used to work all over the place really, you know, just putting up the internal steels in buildings like Gatwick North Terminal. That was one of the jobs I was on. The Docklands Development Scheme, the Canary Wharf, you know, back when it was the Isle of Dogs proper East End, and they were turning it into whatever the hell it is now. Did a lot down in Brighton and that. And when I started on Harefield, that was what I was still doing. Now, towards the end of Harefield, I decided that I couldn't be working for other people. They just didn't understand, really. They didn't get it, you know. They didn't understand that if the pressure dropped or the wind turned to a westerly, I wasn't going to be turning up for work, you know. I got it, my mates got it, but they just didn't get it. So I came up with a scheme, or actually saw a scheme somehow advertised, don't know how, wouldn't have been on the internet, it wasn't there, in a newspaper probably. The government back then in the 80s, I don't know, was that the Thatcher lot? I don't know, wasn't very big on politics. But anyway, the government had come up with this idea, this scheme of theirs, for small businesses. And what they'd said basically was, if you could come up with a plan for a small business, there were certain criteria. You had to, first of all, go to, I think it was a 2-day seminar, which was as boring as hell, of how to run your own small business. Then you had to go to a bank and you had to persuade the bank manager to give you a business account and a loan. At the time I didn't realise why you had to have a loan, but that was the catch in the whole scheme really. It was encouraging people to borrow money from the banks for, you know, so the government end up with whatever percentages of your interest or whatever. I didn't understand, I didn't care. So you had to have a bank account, business bank account, and you had to have a loan of, I think it was $2,000 or more. And you had to have a business plan to obviously convince the bank manager to set you up with all this. So I came up with Artexing. I'd never Artexed in my life. Well, I had once actually, that's a lie. My mate Keith Jenkins, his missus, then decided she wanted her ceiling Artexing. And because I was a bit of a jack of all trades, I used to do like decorating on the side, anything on the side for a bit of cash. I'd gone round there and slapped up all this Artex, didn't have a clue what I was doing, all over their ceiling. It was awful. I mean, really, really awful. It was so bad that we played football once in their front room, and when the ball went up and hit the ceiling, it burst. There was these great big, like, stalactites or stalagmites or whatever they're called, hanging down off the ceiling. But anyway, long story short, I decided I was going to start my own Artexing business. I did a week's course down in Worthing and came out of it as an Artexer. So I was self-employed. I had this government scheme, and the beauty of the government scheme was they paid you some money every week or every month or whatever. They gave you like an incentive payment, and it was really well paid work. I mean, had I been business minded in the 80s, I could have made a lot of money, but I wasn't. I was fishing minded, so I made as little as I needed to make with the bit that the government gave you, which they probably took back off you in tax at the end of the year anyway. And a couple of days a week, I figured I could work Mondays and Tuesdays and have the rest of the time for myself. The $2,000 that the bank lent me, I took the whole lot and spent that in one go on that Volkswagen Transporter I was talking about, which was by far the best mode of transport I've ever had in my life. I was renowned for shitty old cars. There's a thing on Facebook at the moment, you might have seen it, it's one of these, there's millions going around, aren't there, with the apps and the questions and that to keep each other amused, and there's one about cars. The missus done it and her brother done it, and they sent it to me, and what you've got to do is put a picture of the colour and year, you find a picture of the same cars that you've had, and you put them in a little timeline, and they sent it to me, and I was just like, you have got to be joking. I have had hundreds. I used to buy them for 50 quid. I bought them with receipts that have said sold as scrap across it. My cars were truly awful. And unfortunately, at the end of Harefield, my lovely new Transporter, I forgot to put any water in it, and I overheated it, and I cracked the head, and just basically wrote it off. So I was back to my old sort of mode of transport. I had this, it was sort of, how would you describe the colour? Shit brown, I suppose. I'm not even sure what make it was. It was some obscure make. It was like a Astra van, but shorter and fatter. So sort of a hatchback van thing in this disgusting brown. I came out one morning to go down to the lake, and the back windscreen had gone. The kids had put a ball through it or something. So I went round to Keith's house. We got a sheet of 8x4 18mm ply, and I got Keith to hold it up against the gap where the back windscreen, full size back windscreen used to be. I got inside with a black marker pen, and I went round the shape of it, and then we popped the sheet off, added about an inch for an overlap, drew it again, got a jigsaw, cut out this wooden 18mm thick plywood back window. Got Keith to hold it back on. I got an electric drill, drilled 4 big holes in it, and just screwed 4 roofing bolts straight into the car and into the sheet on the back, and that was my back windscreen. And that was the mode of transport that we had. You couldn't see a lot through it, obviously. But that was the mode of transport we had at the time that we decided we'd had enough of Harefield for the winter, or we weren't going to fish it in the winter. We'd had enough for the year, and we were going to move on. We were going to move on to Pit 4. Now, Pit 4 is just across the road from Harefield. You've got the horse and barge is sort of the centre of that part of the valley and everybody's life. Harefield's opposite. Save, the famous Save, runs up one side of the canal, and on the other side of the canal there's pits 1, 2, 3 and 4. Very imaginatively named. 4 is the furthest one, right at the end, all on its own. It is a beautiful lake. It's absolutely beautiful. It's not massive. I don't know. It'd be a stab in the dark if I said how big, but I'm going to guess 14 acres, 20 acres. I don't know. I'm not very good on acreage guessing it, but intimate. Beautiful, beautiful lake. Proper gravel pit, full of gravel bars. Sharp, dangerous. Had some lovely fish in it, and we'd got tickets that were running alongside the Harefield tickets, so we'd bought them in the previous close season. But unfortunately there was a bit of a disaster in the valley that close season. We had a lot of flooding like we had earlier this year, and all the water went down the valley. You know, Harefield pit 1, 2, 3 ended up in pit 4 and sort of flushed it through a little bit, and it soon became apparent, like at the end of the close season, that a lot of the fish had gone from pit 4. They'd been washed into the river at the bottom, which I believe is the Fraze, and the River Fraze goes into, not sure, might be the Colnbrook, but anyway, it ends up in Staines, and there was actually fish spotted in Staines, like in the street, swimming about in all this flood water, and it turns out that a lot of those were the pit 4 carp, the bigger carp in pit 4. And as a consequence, what had happened is most of the members had dropped their tickets. It was run by Hillingdon Borough Council at the time, and it wasn't apparently very well bailiffed anyway, but I think they just gave up on it. You know, so many people had dropped out, it just sort of got forgotten. And our mate Mick had been on there all year while we'd been on Harefield, and he'd been catching. You know, there were still fish in there. He'd been catching fish. I think he'd had 20 fish by the time we decided to join him, but the biggest of those 20 fish was 22 pound. Now back in its prime, like the year before, pit 4 was doing fish up to about 36-ish, something like that, which, like I've said before, 36 pounder at that time was a big fish, and there was only really the Colne Valley and a couple of Kent pits that were capable of doing fish of that size. So we'd got a ticket pre the floods. It was coming into the winter of 1987 it was. And we decided we were going to load up the old wooden back window van and go over to pit 4 and see what we could make of it. So that's exactly what we did. So we rocked up for our first winter, I say winter session, I suppose that's a bit of an exaggeration really. Probably late autumn, you know, maybe end of October, beginning of November, which isn't really winter, is it? Still quite mild. The pit still looked nice, still had a bit of greenery around it. Mick had given us the nod of a few swims of one called the Oaks he'd had quite a few fish out of. The lake itself was sort of, not really, horseshoe would give the wrong impression, but it had a straight bank, like 2 straight banks, like an L, and then it had a point on the other bank, so that formed that side into 2 large bays, and then it tapered off into nothing at the very end, which was where the outlet was into the River Fraze. Excuse me. So yeah, like I say, there was this sort of shorter bank which had the Oaks on it, and then there was a long bank with lots of little swims dotted in there, all very ornate, lovely little swims. It was a small path, and each swim came off of the path, and people had done work there over the years, you know, woven little wicker fences and stuff like that. It wasn't over the top, but people had obviously spent some time up there fishing and got busy, you know, like I do, a little bit of swim building and that. And they were lovely little swims, little secluded swims. The Oaks bank was a little bit more open. There was 2 swims together by the Oaks, so me and Keith could sort of social and fish there. And then, like I say, you went round the back, and there was this point which had a front, 2 swims on the front. One was called the Pads and one was called the Point. and there was one on the back which was called the back point. So that was nice and simple. And at the back of the further bay, there was one swim I remember which was called the Builders. I've no idea why, which seemed to never get fished. I really liked that swim, and I believe there might have been one other really small swim there which didn't get fished at all. So that part of the bank didn't really see any angler attention. It was quite a long hike to get round there, and it was very overgrown as well. But I like that sort of seclusion, if you like. So anyway, we rocked up to do our first session. I think Keith was there, so it must have been a weekend. Keith could only fish weekends. He had a normal sort of Monday to Friday 9 to 5 type job. I was, like I said, a little bit more flexible with my self-employed work. But anyway, so we've rocked up, walked around the lake, and we bumped into a couple of lads. Turns out we knew them anyway because we'd seen them in the pub. Like I said, most people from that part of the valley all sort of gravitated towards the Horse and Barge in the evenings. So we got chatting. There was a guy called Mark, who I'm still friends with now, chat on Facebook and that. Mark Wilcox, you probably know him if you do much carp Facebooking. He was part of a group of about 5 or 6 Essex lads that fished there. And after chatting to him, we realised that was all that was left. I mean, even our mate Mick had finished for the year. And pretty much all the summer, there'd just been this little group of lads, totally left alone. Like I say, no bailiffing, pretty much do what you want. Sounded like a bit of us, really. Go up the pub when you like, have a bonfire when you like, barbecues. So that's what we sort of set about that winter, and thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really, really good fun. We had the crack just like we had been having the crack over at Harefield. We went to the pub just like we used to. There was a little bit of a difference though. Pitfall was quite a long walk. Say a long way, I don't know, half a mile from the pub, and you had a canal towpath which you should have walked had you been sensible. None of us were sensible. You also had a private bumpy lane that serviced these 4 pits. Now this private bumpy lane was in a terrible state. It was all potholes and what have you, but it was fairly straight. Apart from one section in the middle, it went under a viaduct, which must have been the train line, and as it did, it had a bit of a kink, like 45-degree kink, and then it was straight again, and it went up to a gate, and the gate was right near the pub. It was just the other side of the canal to the pub, and it was all private land, so you couldn't officially get done for drink driving. So what we used to do was drive up the lane, get to the gate, pre-turn the cars round so that at least they were pointing in the right direction, which was always a bit of a result. And I used to put a bed in the back of my van thing at the time for Fat Sam, get her all nice and comfortable with a blanket, give her a bowl of water and a bit of food, and leave her in the back of the van, bless her, while we all trotted over the canal and into the Horse and Barge. And then we come out at whatever, usually closing time. Now there's a reason for the drink driving laws. There is I don't drink and drive ever. I mean, I'm fanatical about not drinking and driving. If I go in a pub, I'll have 1 pint. That's it. That's all I ever have. I won't have even a pint and a half. Even if I know I'm below the limit, I know that alcohol affects driving. It just does. It's not a good mix. It's not something you should ever entertain. But in the 80s, when you're young and stupid and you're on private land and you know you can't get nicked, we'd drive back down the lane. You can't drive back down the lane at 25 miles an hour the same as you drove up the lane. It's just not physically, humanly possible. You get behind the wheel, you think you're Sterling Moss, and you go hacking down there. It was like a racetrack down there to get back to the swims at night. The amount of disasters. This bend claimed quite a few. One of the Essex lads, Scott, I think it was, I think he had a Capri at the time. He never saw the bend come in at all and ended up in the woods. I drove straight into the back of Mark's Transit one day. He'd stopped for a laugh he had loads of passengers in the back, all just hanging on, and he'd hit the brakes to shoot them all forwards for a giggle. I was behind him and smashed straight into the back of him. I would have seen him, but at the time I was underneath the dashboard because I'd dropped my CD and I was chasing it around, or probably cassette at that time, chasing it around on the floor trying to put some music in, and I looked up and it was all too late. yeah, we had many automotive disasters down that lane, but you know, as I said, that's why you're not allowed to drink and drive. But no, the winter went past on there, a bit of a blur, a lot of curries, a lot of barbies, a lot of fun, big socials, and quite a few fish. You know, we dotted about the pit, and I think we had, I don't know, maybe 10 or a dozen fish each, something like that, as a guess. But we caught fish, not regular, but we were getting amongst them. But they were very, very similar stamper fish to what Mick had been catching. These fish between sort of 17 and 22, 23 pound at a push, I suppose. Apart from Keith, for some reason. Keith could not catch a fish over 20 pound. Every time he hooked a fish, it was either 17 or 18 pound. But I was getting the odd scraper 20. So obviously in your head you start to think that's what's left, you know. We've got a beautiful lake in a beautiful setting, we've got it all to ourselves or with a few like-minded lads. We're having the time of our lives on here. But, you know, we'd been to Harefield, we caught fish, I'd had 230s by now, and some bigger 20s. And you want to get better. You want to step up. You know, you hear about what's coming out of Save, you know, what's coming out of the Cons, the fisheries, all the other ones in the valley, and lakes further afield. And you start to think to yourself, oh, you know, am I missing out here? I should be progressing on the size of fish, not regressing. So, you know, come the end of that winter, like I say, we thoroughly enjoyed it. But we made a bit of an executive decision. We thought we needed to find somewhere with some big fish in, proper big fish, you know, mid-30s or even, maybe even bigger. You know, there was the odd 40 in the country at that stage. And we'd heard rumour of one of these. I had a good friend at the time, mate, John Teague. He was a plasterer, and like I say, I was an Artexer after a fashion. And I used to do a lot of coving. I got very good at coving and cornicing and that sort of stuff. So we'd work on jobs occasionally together. You know, he'd skim the ceilings and I'd do the coving. And we'd worked over at Fulham on a site, I think. And he only lived in the town next to me. I was in Crawley and he was in Horsham. We used to go to the same Carp Society meetings and the pub and the curry house afterwards and what have you. And he'd started to tell us about a lake that a couple of people who we'd heard of, who he knew through the Carp, he was something to do with the Carp Society, were fishing. And they were none other than people like Pete Springate, Kenny Hodder, Johnny Holt. And they were fishing a lake called Burfield. Now, obviously, now everybody knows Burfield. 1987, not everyone, 98 by then. Not everyone knew Burfield. The Burfield Common didn't exist, or if it did, it was just a small common swimming about in a great big home. There was a couple of fish in there that the lake was known for, a fish called Cuptail. I can't remember the other one, but it had big scattered scales on it. But anyway, there was a couple of good fish in there, and apparently one of these had gone over 40 pounds. So we decided to inquire and see what the crack was with tickets. As it turned out, it was quite easy. I think it was Reading Angling at the time. It was just a free-for-all ticket. It was a massive lake. Obviously, it's huge and probably way out of our sort of depth, if you like. So we also joined another William Boyer's water. Now, William Boyer's are the people that owned Harefield. And they had a water called Rodney Meadow, which probably a lot of people have heard of. It was very famous back then. And that had a fish called Nelson, which was also a very big fish. Problem with Rodney Meadow, we knew it was going to be, it was a small water, it was a busy water, and it was a little bit clicky. It wasn't really something we were used to. We'd been and had a look. We were in two minds whether we were up for it or not, but we got the ticket anyway. So we ended up, you know, at the end of that season, come March or whatever, we'd finished with Pit 4, we'd finished with Harefield, and we had tickets for Burfield, which was huge, new and exciting, and like I say, a bit out of our depth, and Rodney Meadow, which we were unsure. But that's how we went into the 1988 season. Right, I've also decided, as it is 1988 in here at the moment, talking about 1988. We're thinking about 1988. We could smoke in the workplace in 1988. Although Gold Virginia is probably a lot tamer than what used to smoke in 1988, but we won't go there, will we? My children might be watching. So, during that close season, I was working in, I think I'd moved from Fulham to Chelsea. I was on a site there building, well not building, but working on these yuppie flats. Basically, they're just like cheaply made plasterboard flats, huge. But the location made them worth, I don't know, £1 million a piece or whatever. They were right on the banks of the Thames. It was hideous to get to. The traffic in London's awful. But I used to get up there nice and early before the traffic and leave nice and early before the traffic, you know, at the other end. And I was coving, just coving. Money for old rope, it really was. Money was good in the 80s, you know, building site money, especially inner London money was very, very good. I was getting £2.10 a metre for coving. Might not mean a lot to most people, but a piece of coving is 3 metres long, and I could put it up like it was going out of fashion. It's basically you cut the ends, slap a bit of paste on it, goes up in one, rubber sponge along it onto the next one. So you're getting £6.30, look at that, mathematics, eh? £6.30 for every slap and a wipe of a sponge. Now you do that for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, you can rack up some money. So a couple of days a week of that, sorted. But the beauty was, on the way back from the site, I could just take a small detour and swing past the lake, past Burfield. And on my days off, I could go up there and spend all day at Burfield, when I had quite a lot of days off. So a lot of that close season I spent at Burfield, really getting to know the pit and pre-baiting. I decided I was going to pre-bait it with tiger nuts. Now back in the day, like nowadays you use maybe a bucket of hemp and a pound of tiger nuts as a mix. Back then, when tiger nuts were first becoming like major, you'd use a bucket of tiger nuts. It's sort of frowned upon a bit now because the fish did sort of struggle to digest that much nuttage, if you like. Especially a lot of people didn't prepare them properly. You got to soak them I soak them for 48 hours, and then I boil them for a good half an hour at least, maybe longer, maybe an hour. What I used to, I now get them pre-prepared and they're done in that way. But anyway, that's by the by. So, buckets full of tigers in the back of the motor, and I'd go up to Burfield. Now, you can only catapult tigers out so far. I think this was pre-Spod. Spod came first. I don't think anyone was even making spods themselves, let alone commercially back then. So the only way of getting a lot of tigers out was either to catapult them or swim them, and that's what I used to do. I was always in water, always in and out of lakes. So I had a lilo in the back of the motor as well. And what I used to do is to get down to the lake, find the area I wanted to pre-bait, and I'd put the lilo in the water, strip off to my pants, get my bucket of tigers, and then I'd sugar the bucket of tigers gently so I didn't tip the lilo over, and evenly all across the top of the lilo. I'd then pull the lilo to the side and very gingerly sort of slide myself onto the lilo on top of about 5 kilos of tiger nuts, and lay on top of these nuts and paddle myself very, very gently out to the spot that I wanted to pre-bait. And when I got there, I just used to roll the whole bloody lot upside down. All the tigers had fallen in the water, and as they were sinking, I'd tread water and I'd kick like a bugger to get them to spread out as much as I could and whoosh the water about. And that was my method of pre-baiting. But I have nearly come a cropper a couple of times, and one time was indeed up there. I was down on a part of Burfield they call Alsatian Bay. Backs onto some gardens that had Alsatians at some stage. So it's called Alsatian Bay, it's quite a big bay. And there was a bar out there, and I knew there was a bar out there because someone had put a stick in it at some stage in the past, and there's only one reason for a stick that far out the water. It's something to do with fishing, and it's usually in the top of the bar. Now, I've gone round now, I've got a rucksack full of tigers on my back. I didn't have the lilo with me this trip for some reason. But I had this rucksack. It was my fishing rucksack in the season, and it was my bait carrying rucksack in the close season. and I bought it from the Army Surplus store in Crawley, and it was one of those old-fashioned A-frames, I think they call them. So it's just a wire A-shaped frame, and it's got a bluey grey canvas, and it's got a big drawstring at the top, and two straps, very thin, very unpadded straps, and a little clip across the front. It's like what the kids use for schools now, but a lot bigger. I think they're army things, or were army things, or whatever. Anyway, I've got this full of tiger nuts. And I'm stood in this swim, and I'm looking out, the stick's out there, and I'm thinking, it's way out of catapult range out there. How am I going to get these tiger nuts out there? I've got no lilo. I could fill my pockets and swim them out a bit at a time. And then I had a genius idea. So what I'd done, I got the rucksack, and I thought, if I do it up tight, it's going to be practically airtight. So I've done the top up, wound it round tight as I could, put it in the margins gently, let it like that, and it bobbed, floated like a cork. I thought, this is going to be absolute piece of piss. You can see what's coming. Put it on my back, done it up. The clip on the front there was a little bit broken, so I just sort of made the first bit of a shoelace, half a granny knot, pulled that tight just to hold it around my chest, stripped down to my shorts or whatever. Got in the lake and started giving it the old doggy paddle out there. Got out there. The sticks, I don't know, maybe 50 yards out, something, I don't know. Not too far. I'm quite a good swimmer, especially with a big cork on my back. So I've gone out like that. As I'm going out, it's getting heavier and heavier. You know, it's getting more and more pulling me down. It's obviously taking on water. It's only made of canvas. It's getting wet, and the water's seeping through into the tiger nut load on the back. Got within a few yards of the bar, and suddenly I've started going over sideways. It's now totally full of water, and it's weighing more than me, which isn't hard. Suddenly it's flipped. I've like turned tortoise. I'm upside down, and I'm going down quite fast. I thought, well, I'm in trouble here. Underwater, donk. I've got down to the bottom, and I've gone like that to try and undo. No, I tried to unclip the rucksack so it wouldn't drown me, but the little granny knot thing I'd done wouldn't come undone. With the extra weight, it had pulled these cords real tight into a little knot, and I tried and tried to get this, and now I'm panicking. I'm running out of breath. You know, I don't know how deep it was, maybe 10 foot. I'm running out of breath, and I'm trying to get this little knot undone. I've got this rucksack full of tigers on my back, and I'm basically drowning in Alsatian Bay. And then I thought, I know. So I've gone like that, and luckily I've got the right bit of cord, and I've pulled it, and it's come undone. And I've had to sort of turn over and empty the tiger nuts out of it in a big heap on the deck, and then push myself off the bottom. By the time I got to the surface, I was gasping, you know. Broke out the surface, great big lungs full of air, and I mean, it shit me up, to be honest. I was proper scared. I got back to the bank, I was shaking, and I just thought, what the hell are you doing? You know, is it actually worth this? You don't even know that the fish are there, that the fish are eating it, and at the end of the day, they're just fish, aren't they? You know, is it worth risking your life every week doing this stupidity just to throw some tiger nuts into the lake? I don't know what the answer was. Might have been probably. But yeah, so that was one of my near-death experiences. I have had others, but we won't go into them all at once. They'll come in time. But that's one of the closest I've got, to be honest. I very nearly did drown. I nearly changed the name of Alsatian Bay into Dead Body Bay, I think, that session. But yeah, so, you know, like I say, most of the close season was spent up there wandering about, looking, sort of learning it ready. I saw a few fish here, there and everywhere, just dotted about. Not many, there wasn't many in there. It was a hard lake to walk around. It was a very hard lake to walk around. It's very easy to get lost at Burfield. Round what they call the dogleg section, there's paths that go round small channels of water and then come out somewhere else, and then suddenly you've got water almost on all sides of you. And you can see the bit of land you want to be on, and it's 30 yards the other side of a channel. But you try getting there. You know, to get there, you've got to come back and sometimes go the wrong way to get round the back of like the river or another little lagoon, and then come all the way round, and eventually you'll end up 30 yards away from where you started, and it's quite easy to. There's other lakes there as well. You know, I've ended up on the wrong lakes thinking I was on Burfield. It's a very convoluted place. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It is now, and it was then. So yeah, I'd done my sort of homework with it. I hadn't even really thought about Rodney Meadow at all. And come the first day of the season, the old June the 16th, me and Keith were absolutely gagging to get up there and give it a go, really. Wet me whistle, what we got here? Ginger ale without brandy. Something interestingly wrong about that, isn't there? Maybe I could put some moonshine in there when I've drunk a bit. Anything wrong with working from here? Because this is up in the attic of the garage. It's my memory. The amount of times I've got like a step ladder to get up and down, and the amount of times it takes me, the amount of journeys it takes me to get set up to do a few hours of filming is incredible. You know, I get up here, I've forgotten the memory card because that's still in the computer from the day before. I've forgotten to bring a drink. I've forgotten to bring batteries for the camera. I've forgotten to bring everything really. Today I forgot to bring a glass from the moonshine. But anyway, it's all up here and I'm sorted. So where was I? Oh yeah, Burfield, first session. First and last session, actually, I think was the reality. We turned up on the first day of the season, June 15th, 16th, whatever it is. Me and Keith got our gear, loaded up the barrows down in the end, I think it was Meadow Lane, which is the old washing plant. It's the shallows of Burfield now, where they used to have a washing plant. It had gone by the time, even by 1988, it had gone. But as such, that bay was very silty, very shallow, had big reeds in one end, and it was an area where, one of the areas where I'd seen fish throughout the close season. So we trundled the gear around there. We weren't first on the pit by any means. There were people that probably got there the night before. There were more people than we thought on there. The twins was fishing at one side of the bay. There was, I think, Johnny Holt was down in the goose area. There weren't a lot, but there were enough anglers about. Probably a good 6 or 8 carp anglers plus others. It turned out it was very popular for spinning, float fishing, you know, whatever, just general coarse fishing, which was a nightmare because some of those lure anglers have got, they just come, you know, you get all your rods set up, get them on the spots you want, next thing, plop, a bloody great big S lure comes through, drags your lines out, oh sorry mate, and you've got to put your rods back out. Speedboats were a nightmare. I can't remember seeing speedboats in the close season. Maybe they have a season, I don't know. But there were speedboats all over it, big waves coming in. It was all a bit much for us, to be honest. But on the first afternoon, I saw something under there. It was a very, very close island. I believe the swim is now called Bailiffs or Bailiffs Point, and that's where we were. And there's an island really close, maybe 20, 30 yards away, and it's very shallow in the margins of it. And I was sat there and I was looking out and I said to Keith, I said, what is that? That sort of leaf thing? What's going on under that island? And there was this brown, like a leaf, but the size of your hand. And it was just kept twisting and turning like that on the surface. And I'm looking and looking, and eventually I got the bins out and had a look. And it was the top lobe of a carp's tail, just one lobe. So that's, you know, that's a big carp. And it was obviously feeding on the shallow margin of the island, and its tail was out of the water, and it was trying to balance itself on its head on whatever it was scoffing on, which gave me lots of confidence. I managed to get a rig somewhere near it. Nothing happened throughout the afternoon, and eventually the fish drifted off. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go out there and investigate. Like I said, always in the pit as much as I was next to the pit. So stripped off, got a bag of bait, gone swimming out there, stood up on this shallow bit where this carp had been and thought, oh, you know, this, that and the other, and looked around. It was really shallow, but there was a nice little slope came off the side, and then there was a flat bit, like a little shelf, little sandy shelf, and I thought, that is absolutely perfect. That's bang on for a bite, that is. So sprinkled my bait around there. I think I probably went back, got my rig, swum that out there as well, set all that down how I wanted it. Came back, got settled in, we had the barbecue, cut beers, whatever. Next morning I woke up and I thought, oh, my leg's a bit sore. I put down my leg and I'm covered in mosquito bites. At the time I was like a magnet for mosquitoes, and I always had a reaction to them. Any bite I got came up like a great big hump. And I got a bite on my leg, which was obviously scratched. It was bleeding a little bit, but it didn't look too clever. It looked it had a big red welt round it. It looked infected. Didn't think a lot of it. Anyway, we fished on through the day, done whatever we did. I think we wandered up Cunning Man at lunchtime for something to eat and a couple of pints. Came back, had a walk around the pit. I mean, you know, say that casually, you know, to walk around Burfield's no mean task, to be honest. It's, you know, 3 or 4 hours or whatever if you're going up and down, getting lost, going the wrong way, chatting to anglers as you go. Settled in again, got the rods back out, nothing happened that night. I woke up the next morning, we had a couple of days, I think we were there for the week actually, or 4 or 5 nights, whatever. Woke up the next morning and my leg was in a right old state. It had swelled right up, I mean like a balloon. It was almost the size of like a normal person's leg rather than one of these little chicken legs. Yeah, it puffed right up, and this thing on the side was enormous. It had a huge, great red, blue and purple thing round it by now. It looked like a boil, but big and obviously infected. You could push your finger into my ankle, take your finger out, and it would still leave a finger dent. It was all full of fluid. Now, I don't like doctors, hospitals and all of that. I'm not one for trotting up A&E or down the doctors. I usually wait till I've got a list of about 5 or 6 things wrong with me before I go to a doctor's surgery. But there was obviously, this wasn't getting any better. I wasn't in a very clean environment. I was a bit worried about it, to be honest. So sometime later that day, whatever, middle of the day, I decided to find out if there was a doctor's surgery around. I asked a couple of like, local anglers, and sure enough there was one up the road. So I thought, sod it, I'm going to go. So I got in the van, drove up there, gone in to see the quack. Well, actually I didn't. I tried to get an appointment because I'm not registered or whatever. They wouldn't give me one, but I showed them the side of my leg and they were like, oh dear, that's nasty. You can see the nurse, or whatever they call them, I can't remember what they're called, the person that filters whether you're allowed to see a doctor or not. So anyway, I trotted in to see this nursey girl. She was scary. God, she was a bloody great thing. Proper bruiser. And she started prodding, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Oh. And she had a look, and she said that's quite badly infected. And she gave me some sort of a paste, like a thick toothpastey stuff in a little jar. Can't remember what it was called. And a dressing, and that she put some on it and put a dressing on, and she gave me some to change the dressing. And she said if 24 hours later it hasn't gone down, to come back in, and she was going to lance it, which basically means sticking a bloody great big hypodermic syringe thing in it and sucking all the blur out of it. And I just thought, there is no way I'm letting you near that with that thing. That's just not happening at all. So anyway, I've gone back to the lake. Oh, and keep it elevated, I think she said. So I propped it up on a crate of beer or whatever. Left this dressing on there. Again, fished on through the night, nothing happened. In the morning, got out of bed and looked, and it felt a lot better, to be honest. And it looked a little bit smaller. So I've taken this dressing off, and oh my God, the smell was unbelievable. And I had a hole in my leg. I reckon you could have got a pencil in it, where this tincture, this white stuff, had sucked everything out. I know it's horrible, isn't it? I don't know why I'm talking about this. And it had sucked everything, all the poison. It had done its job, basically. The wadding, the bandage thing was just full of like an algae bloom in it. And I got this big, deep black hole in the side of my leg, but it was fixed, you know. I wasn't going to die, I wasn't going to lose my leg, and Nursey wasn't going to get in there with the big syringe and suck it all out. And as soon as it got better, well enough to walk on, I think we packed up and did exactly that. Walked off back to the motor, and we never returned. Well, I say we never returned. I returned about 25 years later. But that's a whole different story. So I think the week after our Burfield disaster, you will have to excuse me if at some stage during the last bit of recording I've called Harefield Burfield or Burfield Harefield. I still do it today. Even recently when I was fishing at Burfield, I was even calling it Harefield then. I don't know why, just very small brain, too full of how to catch carp to worry about what things are actually called, and I quite often get those two names transposed. Good word, isn't it? Transposed. I wonder if it's the right one. It sounded good anyway. So anyway, yeah, the week after that lake disaster, we decided we were going to go to Rodney Meadow. We had the ticket, obviously, and thought we'd go and give it a look. We didn't actually go too well, to be honest. It weren't really a bit of us. We got there, the lake was very busy. There was only 2 swims left, both down the car park end, one actually in the car park. Excuse me, that ginger ale's playing up on me. And one in the opposite car park corner, which is where I went. It was a lovely looking swim, and a great big massive overhanging tree in the corner, and the wind was real pumping in there. I couldn't believe that all the other swims were taken all the way around the lake and this one was empty. It looked like the best swim on the lake to me. I remember getting set up in there. Keith went in the car park swimming, which also looked good. The wind was sort of coming across into both, but mainly into mine, but both swims looked spot on. We'd had a walk round. We'd spoken to a couple of lads that were friendly. Most of them just were a bit not. We also noticed we got watched. We'd be over at one side of the lake and you'd see people watching you through the bins from the other side. And we thought, yeah, this is a bit odd, we're not used to this. Anyway, I got in my little overhanging tree swim. I was just getting my rod sorted, and a fella walks along behind me. And he stopped and he went, fishing in there then, are you? I'm like, yes mate, it looks good, doesn't it, with the wind and that? He said, nothing ever gets caught from there. He said, no one ever fishes in there. And off he went. And I thought, well, if no one ever fishes in there, then nothing's ever going to get caught from there, is it? You know, you hear that sort of thing so often in carp fishing, don't you? You know, people saying, oh, pop-ups don't work on here, no one uses them anymore. And you think, well, you're not going to. No one uses them, they're not going to work. So I was in this swim that never gets fished, but never does a fish. Obvious what's going to happen. I think it had been out there about 2 hours and the old tip whipped round and I was in and I played this fish. I don't know, double figure common I think the first one was, because there was another. Later on, can't remember, evening, whatever, whack, it's gone round again and I've looked into this fish and it was a 19-pound mirror, I think. I would put a photo up here, but I haven't got photos, I can't even remember what they looked like, it was that long ago. You may have noticed a slight morphing there as I changed into another version of myself. It's quite a good effect, I quite like that. My memory card just got full. I'd forgotten to delete any of the previous vlogs, blogs, whatever they are, podcasts. And it suddenly just cut out memory card full. And you may have also noticed that my teacup has changed into a glass with some ice in it, because the ginger without brandy just wasn't really cutting it, so I've decided it's probably moonshine time before I carry on. I thought cold would be nice. Oh, large measure, why not, eh? Do tend to drink a lot on this lockdown thing, don't you? Drink a lot, smoke a lot, and chat a lot. There's not an awful lot else to do, but there you go, such is life. So have a quick sip of this and then try and remember where I was. I had to run downstairs with the memory card, well, run down step ladder with the memory card, delete off all the old bits of video, make a bit of room, and get some refreshments. That really is nice. So where was I? Oh yeah, a couple of fish out of Rodney Meadow, and like I said, didn't really mean a lot to us at the time because we'd already decided that we weren't going to stay there. It was too small, too busy, too clicky, and wasn't what we were looking for. We were, you know, we'd had Pit 4, we'd had Harefield, we'd had all those lovely lakes we'd fished together over, you know, in Pippinford Park and all the things. I haven't spoke about them on here, but in our coming of age, if you like, we'd fished lovely places with not too many anglers around. We'd fished places like Harefield with, you know, a good crew of anglers. we'd had a little go on Burfield. Yeah, Rodney Meadows just really weren't cutting it for us. So the next, well, I don't know, probably by lunchtime the next day, we'd packed up, we'd had enough. I can't remember if Keith caught one. I think he might have either caught one or lost one as well. So we'd had bites. We'd done quite well, really, for a one-night session. Yeah, we'd done all right, but didn't really fancy it going forward. So we packed up, and it's not far from Harefield, not Burfield, Harefield. So we went back over to Harefield. We hadn't got tickets, but we could get in, and we had got mates still fishing there, and we wandered around. I think we might have bumped into John Teague actually, who told us originally about Burfield. So I'm getting there now. Harefield, Burfield. I should write them on the back of my hands. I think we bumped into him. He might have been fishing the causeway. We had a chat with him, and then by sort of tea time, we decided to retire into the horse and barge. We still had that night, but we didn't have anywhere to fish now. Unless we went back to Rodney, which wasn't happening. So we went into the horse and barge, had a bit of lunch, I think, in there, and a few beers, and then the anglers started coming in. Old Smelly Corner was starting to get a bit populated. And Mark came in, Mark Wilcox. We got chatting to him and said, "What are you up to?" and that, she said, "I'm still on pit 4." He said he'd seen some quite good fish, up to sort of £30, which was, bear in mind, 23, I think, 22 or 23 was the biggest we'd had between the three of us the year before. I don't think Mark and his crew had a lot of bigger ones that particular year. But he said he'd definitely seen better fish than what we'd been catching. And there was one fish in there called Grey Scar. It was a bit mythical, it was one of them. Obviously had a big grey scar, its identification, and that was supposed to be a good fish, sort of a good mid-30, which is big fish back then, and it was chatting to him, it got more and more encouraging, and obviously the more and more beer we had, the better the stories got, and the more encouraged we got, and the more drunk we got, obviously. And we didn't have anywhere to fish or anywhere to hurry back to, so we did the full tour that night. We did the pub. I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but there's Sabu's. Sabu's is the Indian restaurant in Harefield Village. It's next to Harefield Tackle. Well, whether it's still there, I don't know. Probably not called Sabu's anymore. Probably wasn't even called Sabu's then, but that's what everyone knew it as, Sabu's. So somehow we managed to get from the pub to Sabu's with God knows how many other carp anglers. I mean, remember there was quite a lot in there that night. I do remember snippets of the night. I think Richie McDonald was in there. He was sat next to me, and I spent the whole night, I was quite drunk, I was winding him up something rotten. He's quite easy to wind up. Dougal and his crew were in there. There was a load of us. Basically, when the pub shut, and if the carp anglers went in there, no one else would go in there, and they used to push all the tables together, so you just had one big long row of tables, and it was just carp anglers, and it was rowdy as hell in there. Everyone was slaughtered, everyone was wanting more beer, more kingfisher, more cobra, more curry, more vindaloo. I do remember I ended up in the kitchens at some stage that night. I have absolutely no idea why. I think Dougal had to pull me out of the kitchens. I wasn't creating or anything, I just wanted to see what happened in the kitchens. But yeah, it was a wild old night in the Indian. And then the next thing I remember, we were back on the causeway. I think John Teague must have been with us in the Indian, because we were back on the causeway. For some reason I had the sign closed and open, and the hours on it, the little one on the string that you hang inside the door. I had that. I think someone even had the shop keys. I don't know. And I had a tea tray with loads of dents in it. I think I'd been hitting people over the head with it for a laugh or whatever. One of them nights, one of them proper messy nights. Vague memory of being on the causeway, and then me and Keith woke up the next morning. I think we were just in the grass outside John Teague's, or next to John Teague's bivvy on the causeway at Harefield, with not a lot of recollection of what went on the night before, but plenty going on in there. Head was absolutely pounding. I thought there is no way that I am getting on the M25 and driving for an hour home. Not yet, not for a long while. And then we remembered the conversation from the night before. We remembered the Mark conversation. Pit 4, the fish, the 30 pounder, grey scar, this, that, the other. So what a perfect way to ease the hangover and spend the morning. And it was just across the road. So we went over there, went up the lane, got to Pit 4. I think there was 2 guys fishing. Can't remember who they were. Gave them a wide berth, started walking around, went round to the point at the back. Like I say, behind there is the back point and this bay with the builders swim over the other side. But the actual bay itself is massively overgrown. The reeds have spread right out and reclaimed a lot of the lake. And there's a huge tree that had fallen over there, and it was laying at about sort of 30 degrees angle across the water. So it wasn't so much as a climb as a walk up it. So we've gone round, gone through the reeds. I'd seen a couple of little swirls over near it. And we've got on this tree. Fat Sam was with us. I don't know what I did with Fat Sam when I went to the Indian the night before. Probably left her in a van. She was a good old dog. She didn't mind. She always knew I was coming back, whatever happened, you know. If I put her in a little bed somewhere, she'd just stay there and wait. She knew Dad would be back at some stage. Anyway, I digress. So we got round there, me, Keith and Fat Sam, broke down the reed. She was along with us. And me and Keith climbed up on this tree, turned around, Sam's coming with us. So it ended up with all 3 of us, probably 20 or 30 yards out over the lake, but only about 10 foot above the surface on this great big sort of semi-fallen tree that obviously fallen and propped on something else. We got out there, as soon as we got on the tree, our little world's changed. We just looked down, there must have been 20 carp down there. You know, when you see them sometimes just below the surface, the water's really clear, the light's just right, and you can see every scale, even the little starburst scales. You can see the mucus around their gills, you can see the slime, you can see everything, the gills pumping, and they're just sitting there, happy as Larry, the lot of them. And the more we looked, the more we saw, and there was obviously fish there, far better than the 23 pound biggest one we'd had. You know, there was a few there that were clearly mid-20s, 26, 27, that sort of stamp. There was one I remember seeing which was again bigger, not you know, the mythical grey scar bigger, but could have been a 30 pounder. Much better fish than we'd seen, and everything changed like that. Our whole world's changed. We'd got nowhere really that we wanted to fish, no tickets that we wanted to use, and suddenly, bang, you know, we're back. I mean, the lake is heaven. We had nothing against the lake at all. It had everything that we ever required for carp fishing, apart from bigger carp. And there they were, bigger carp, right in front of us, just flaunting right there. And it was just like, you know, there was a few moments of silence as we both separately sort of processed what we were seeing. And then it was just jaw wars. We were just like, oh, you know, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to get tickets. And because it was run by Hillingdon Borough Council, councils, as you know, we've all dealt with councils with something, planning, rent, whatever, over the years. They ain't the quickest, are they? And we thought there's no way we can just phone them up and get a ticket by the next week. Because, I mean, you know, we wanted one in 5 days' time. But we did. We managed. I phoned them up and I hassled and I hassled and I hassled. I think they said, yeah, it's no problem. We'll post you a form, fill in the form, and then post the form back with your photos. And I said, mate, you don't get it, you know. You really are not understanding. This isn't how it's working. I need this now. And he said, well, you can't, you know, you can't come into the offices. And somehow I got my hands on, I think Keith at work had a fax machine, and I think we did it via the fax machine. Sent everything instantly there, left it probably a minute, and then rung him up. Have you got it? Have you got it? Have you got it? Yeah, I've got it, but we'll send it out. Can you send it first class? We'll pay extra. You know, proper got on the guy's case, and fair play to him. By the next week, in time to go fishing, we had our tickets and we were back. We were on Pit 4. It was still well and truly the summer. So if we'd had a week on Burfield and a session on things, so it must have been the beginning of July, I reckon. Season starts second week of June. So yeah, some first or second week of July probably. Got the whole summer ahead of us. pit looked amazing. It was all within, we'd seen it in the winter before, now it was all in bloom, all the trees were heavy and hanging over, all laden with, greenery. There was bits of weed coming up, the water was quite clear. It was just heaven, absolute heaven. There was still only the same few anglers, and in fact there was even less than there was the year before. Mark and the Essex boys were still fishing there. And a couple of their mates had joined, but everybody else had gone. It was just, there's probably 6 or 7 other anglers apart from me and Keith that well, not had tickets, but were going to fish it. That sort of info we got off of Mark of what had happened in the first couple of weeks. It wasn't busy in the first 2 weeks of the season, so it weren't going to be busy throughout the summer. So it was all there for us, just laid out perfectly. Just one of them little twists of fate, That's why I named that Fine Lines, because they're the fine lines that create your destiny, if you like. Like closing doors. You go through it, you don't go through it, and everything changes. If we hadn't decided, if people at Rodney Meadow, if we hadn't thought, oh, this ain't the one, if we'd done a second night at Rodney Meadow because we'd caught, none of this would have happened. But we hadn't, and we'd gone back and we'd gone to the pub and we'd met Mark, and it had all led to this, you see, pub, fishing. They're linked, as I tried to tell you so many times. Very important part. And it had led us to have tickets to go back to Pit 4 and to start what was going to be a glorious, glorious summer of adventure. And don't forget, if you are enjoying the stories from Book 1, Obsession with Carp, that we do have Book 2 and Book 3, Flick of the Tail and Fine Lines. Got them on lockdown COVID special. I'm allowed to say that. On my website www.davelane.co.uk. 15 quid for Flick of the Tail, 25 quid for Fine Lines, all come out signed. So if you're super bored and sitting at home, as you should be, like we all are, then something to read. Anyway, until next time, stay safe, stay well, see you later.